So let me get this straight. After months of shouting, close the schools, if it'll save just one life, think of the children. Now the CDC is doing a complete 180 and warning that it will be a catastrophic health issue if we don't open the schools. All of a sudden, out of the blue, the CDC is worrying about the kids that come from broken homes, or get free lunch at school, or get counseling services at school, when the very same CDC basically threw these kids under the bus back in March and didn't seem to give two shits about them back then. I've been talking about this on my live stream for months, and not once did it enter into any of the CDC's previous arguments. I don't think that it's any coincidence that the CDC is now suddenly arguing for public schools after seeing survey results that over 40% of American households are now considering homeschooling for their children. In some states where registration with the state is required for homeschooling, the number of families that have registered have already doubled. The online Zoom schooling was, by most accounts, a hot mess. Parents who had never done homeschooling and had never wanted to do homeschooling were suddenly expected to homeschool with zero resources. Teachers were told they couldn't grade work or even require assignments to be done. No one had any direction. And when it comes down to it, if you opened up the dictionary and looked under shit show, well, first you'd see the entire COVID-19 84 response in its entirety, and then as the first bullet point, you'd see the joke that became the public school system.
People just need free stuff. Don't you guys know anything?
And there's really no excuse for it with all of the resources that are available online. There are plenty of homeschooling groups and organizations. Khan Academy is a free online school used by some of the top schools in the country, and there's also, for example, the Ron Paul homeschooling curriculum and the Tom Woods Liberty Classroom, both of which are affiliates of this channel, and you should consider checking them out for either yourself or your kids. Both curriculums have amazing content completely free of Marxist and social justice influence, both have classes by Tom Woods, and subscribe to free market values. The Ron Paul homeschooling curriculum is a top-notch education that focuses on using primary sources instead of textbooks and teaches kids how to teach themselves and be independent thinkers, something severely lacking in today's public education. And bonus, not a single course all the way up through senior year of high school uses Common Core. To check out either the Ron Paul or Tom Woods classrooms, check out the links down in the description. But even if you are not coming from a right-leaning or liberty-based perspective, there are literally tons of resources out there for homeschooling.
I looked into it and her story checks out.
The government is failing at public education, and I think they know it. It's important to realize that it's in the public health's best interest for K-12 students to get back into face-to-face learning, the CDC told Congress last week. About 7.1 million kids get their mental health service at schools. They get their nutritional support from their schools. We're seeing an increase in drug use disorder as well as suicide in adolescent individuals. There's really very significant public health consequences of the school closure. Well, yeah. I reported months ago how the UN said that millions of children were going to starve due to economic shutdowns and school closures. I've been reporting over and over again since the start of this on the increase in drug use, suicides, and alcoholism. One of the top indicators for depression and suicide is economic instability. And guess what happens when you shut down economies? Several counties across the country have seen more deaths from suicide and drug overdoses than they've seen from COVID.
That didn't work out like you'd planned, did it?
Honestly, I think that putting kids in plastic cubicles and not letting them near each other or letting them have lunch or recess isn't healthy for kids either and is definitely going to affect their emotional and mental development. It takes away everything that makes kids kids. And it takes away the #1 argument I hear against homeschooling, that kids need school for social interaction. Well, all of these new rules for public schools explicitly forbid social interaction. Meanwhile, small little homeschooling groups of 5 or 10 kids are perfectly allowed under COVID restrictions and are going to teach kids more about social skills than sitting in a plastic box all day with teachers that aren't allowed to come within 6 feet to help them tie their shoes or fix a math problem. Check out the first line in the CDC press release about the need to open schools. Schools are an important part of the infrastructure of communities and play a critical role in supporting the whole child, not just their academic achievement. How does sending your kid to live in a fishbowl for 8 hours a day support the whole child? On one of my recent streams, we sat and we looked at the plans put out by local schools. These plans take away recess, they take away lunch, allow no contact between students, no contact between teachers and students, require teachers to wear masks, goggles, and surgical gowns, no changing of classrooms, no arts, no sports, no gyms, no social time, no extracurriculars. Desks are to be separated by plexiglass, and kids have to bring all their own supplies, and if they forget something, well, they can't do their work that day because they're not allowed to borrow anything from anyone else. And the CDC expects you to believe that this environment is absolutely about nurturing the whole child, when there is nothing nurturing about it. I think it's pretty telling that the first part of that sentence is about infrastructure rather than childhood development. Infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. It's a word thrown around a lot in their press releases about schools. Meanwhile, a representative in Illinois wants to abolish history classes in public schools altogether. Democratic Rep. LaShawn Ford recently went to the Illinois State Board of Education and demanded the state either revise their entire history curriculum to focus on LGBT communities and minority groups, or else stop teaching history completely. He claims that the history classes in Illinois public schools are directly responsible for racism and white privilege and thus need to be dismantled. He did argue for the schools to teach some version of civics instead, which is a fair point, but can't be swapped for pretending history doesn't exist. You can also include the contributions of African Americans and women and gay people without completely erasing everything else. This does not have to be an either-or situation. Now, with that, and the use of Common Core methods that most parents don't even understand because Common Core is completely ridiculous, plus all of the hullabaloo around COVID, really, what benefit is there to sending your kids to public school aside from getting them out of the house? The government isn't exactly making a good case for itself here, and I think some of the folks in government know that. They see that public support is slipping, and controlling the schools is the #1 way that you control your populace. So now they're pulling out the poverty and mental health card. To anyone with half a brain in their heads, this should be too little too late and should make them question the motivations here. On the one hand, yes, COVID isn't going away, so we should start getting things back to normal. On the other, what they're looking to do with schools is not normal and is a good way to teach kids to have anxiety, foster blind obedience, and fear other people. That's it for this rant against the stupidity of government bureaucracy. Until next time, thanks for tuning in and helping me to spread the message of liberty.